الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Inshallah, today we'll begin, since we finished last week, our discussion on the history of a hadith, compilation, its authenticity. That leaves us then to continue in our search of knowledge and seeking of knowledge to a different topic. And the topic we want to cover today, or begin as an introduction, and the topic that's very important for every student of knowledge, anyone aspiring to grow in their knowledge, and that is Usul Fiqh. And really, brothers and sisters, the topic of Usul Fiqh is one that's very big, requires a lot of time and effort. But the way in which we, inshallah ta'ala, we hope to cover it, as we did it before in a summarized way when we went over Risalat of Shaykh Abdul Nasir bin Nasir al-Sa'di rahimahullah, Risalat al-Taifa. We covered that before some years ago. And then we did after that Imam Sa'di's al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya, Manzumat al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya, we covered that. And our teacher Fajr, he went over Waraqat before. And other than that, so it's not the first time maybe that we did Usul al-Fiqh in some capacity. But the idea, brothers and sisters, that we need to take it from the theory to application. And this is the part where if someone doesn't do it, and doesn't have a methodology for it, they will never be able to really benefit from Usul al-Fiqh. Usul al-Fiqh will simply be a nadariya, a theoretical concept in your head, and doesn't have any tatbiq, has no application. And this is a huge problem because you can't become a talib al-ilm, let alone a shaykh, or mujtahid if you don't know anything about the principles of Usul al-Fiqh and its application. And also we'll see today as a muqaddim introduction to the topic, without Usul al-Fiqh or Usul in general, it's not just Usul al-Fiqh, Usul in general, fundamental principles, you cannot understand the deen in an in-depth manner. Whether it be aqeedah, whether it be fiqh, whether it be manhaj, whether it be whatever topic. Without Usul, there is no strength in your knowledge. And it will be little to differentiate between what you have of knowledge and capacity and a layperson. As we'll see an example. What is the difference between a talib ilm and an ami? It's a big difference, right? Talib ilm and ami, both of them may know something. But the layperson, the ami, he just knows the summary. He doesn't know the mechanism. He doesn't have any rules and principles. He just knows the end story. And this is the problem we're finding, that many times when we're studying many issues, whether it be fiqh we did or any subject you studied throughout the week, if you're studying the masail, just the masail, the issues, bidun dalail, without the evidences, then you're not going to become a proper student of knowledge. And we said before, ilm was what? Fada'il wal masail. And okay, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, others mentioned ilm, that's fada'il wal masail. Fada'il is fada'il a'mal, yani riyad salihin. Wa masail fil fiqh. في العقيدة مسألة. And then when you get to the masail, so fadail is like you tell me the hadith about fadl Jum'ah. 1, 2, 3, bring the hadith. طيب أحكام الجمعة مسألة. You see the difference? So fadail is good, you need it. Masail you need it. But then when you get to the masail, now what do you need? I have the issues, I need the dalil. I need the mas'ala, the topic we're talking about, with dalil, issues for the topic. With dalala and the signification, the tools to get there. How do you conclude that? Wal hukum. And we said this before. Knowledge then in fiqh or other topics. Mas'ala, what's the issue you're talking about? Wal hukum, what's the ruling you got? What dalil, what's the proof you have? What dalala, how did you get there? And that's usul al-fiqh, dalala. Dalala, brothers, how do you reach that? So hukum. So mas'ala, what's the topic you're studying? Issue at hand. Wal hukum, the ruling that you derived. Right? So for example, wudu, we said wudu is shart, it's a condition for salah. طيب. Mas'ala, wudu. Right? And the ruling you're going to be looking at, the mas'ala is hukum al-wudu. And then the hukum you're going to reach is that shart, it's a condition for salah. That's khulasa, that's your hukum. Condition, wajib, to do it for salah. What dalil? Where's your proof for that? What dalala? How does the proof lead to that? So if you have, for example, some of these elements, you have knowledge. But in order to have the strength of your knowledge, you need all 4 elements. And so most of us can see then, if someone gives you the mas'ala or the hukm ma'a dalil, and he doesn't know how he reached it, it's not complete. That's good, but you didn't have the rest of it. You need more. And you may notice that if somebody's studying and all they're doing is jama' al-masail, you're collecting issues in your notebook, and the adillah, and then when someone asks you, you say, well, all I know is it's haram, brother. And someone says, how did you get there? Wallahu a'lam. The sheikh said it's haram. I came to the class. And he's still ami then. What were you doing? The sheikh just told you haram, that's it. And you notice, brothers and sisters, that's a problem. Because Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah, the stakes are high. The haqq we have to present to the people. We can't just be telling them to taqleed of us. That's not right. So people who are studying the deen will go further. People who just are learning the basics, yeah, they just get the rulings, that's good. As we'll see an example. But usul, brothers, that's why we need usul al-fiqh, usul al-deen, usul al-manhaj, usul al-arabiya, usul everything, tafsir. And that's when we hear usul, foundations, we shouldn't be scared. We should be excited and say, okay, I need to learn these. Because there is a phobia of usul al-fiqh. And we're going to talk about who made this phobia, right? But there's a phobia. People hear usul al-fiqh, they say, subhanAllah, that's the hardest subject. It can be. Arguably is, if you study traditionally, it's the hardest subject you're going to reach. But that's not the usul al-fiqh we're supposed to be studying with us. The usul al-fiqh that's full of kalam, ilm al-kalam, wa ilm al-mantiq, and discussions which have nothing to do with fiqh, ahkam amaliyah, that's not usul al-fiqh. I'm going to prove it today, it's not. So today's lecture is really about the importance of this topic and the methodology of studying usul al-fiqh properly, to take you from principles to application. And then every week, inshallah, we'll go a little bit. And these principles are immediately applicable to your life. When you study anything, you can use them. But brothers and sisters, we have to be mindful that it's important. When you come to study these things, you pay attention to them and you see their value, but also try to write them down and learn them. As the ulama, they always say, Man hafid al-usula, whosoever memorizes or preserves the principles, ghanim al-usul, might he be, inshallah, successful in reaching his goal. وَمَنْ ضَيَّعَ الْأُصُولَ, whomsoever wastes away or does not obtain the usul, حُرِمَ الْوُصُول, he will be prevented from reaching his objective. So with that being said, let's look at first an example, and then we'll talk about how to go about understanding usul al-fiqh as an overview, and then going into some of the methodologies that we need. To begin, the value of usul al-fiqh is in the fact that the ulama have studied, taught, wrote, and spent a lot of time in its spread and its teaching. And obviously we know that the beginning of its compilation in terms of book form is Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah, right? Kitab al-Risala, and this is something the ulama always mention. But the Salaf al-Salih, the pious predecessors before him, like the Sahaba, they had usul al-fiqh. And usul al-fiqh, it just translates really to the theory, legal theory, or the principles that allow you to understand the evidences. So when you study fiqh, you're studying the evidences to figure out the rulings. But usul al-fiqh is to study the evidences themselves and their indications. What are the evidences and what do they prove? That's the subject. So if you're studying adillah, you're in usul al-fiqh. If you're studying the conclusions or the outcomes, or you're studying the actual issues of fiqh, that's called fiqh. And fiqh and usul al-fiqh go hand in hand. We talked about it before. You need them to do usul fiqh. To do fiqh, you need usul al-fiqh. But without usul al-fiqh or usul in general, you will not be really able to benefit yourself the way that you hoped. And this is because you will only be able to obtain or transmit some type of knowledge. But you will not be able to go further understanding how that knowledge is presented and why is it right and why is it not right. Example, if a person learns a ruling, he has the truth maybe from the correct view, or the majority view, or based on hadith. The problem though is that he can't necessarily now go and teach people the way he's supposed to because he doesn't have the dalala, the indications, or you could say the reasonings, the ta'leel, as the reasons as to how you got there. And this would then make the conclusion become very weak, or at least not convincible to others, even though he's right. But he could only transmit just the answer. Versus if you study both, you can transmit and you can convince somebody what's right and what's wrong, and that's the value. So dalil ma'a ta'leel. We want dalil, evidence, wa ta'leel, and rationality. So remember those two words, dalil wa ta'leel. Ta'leel is why, how. So we know when you first started learning, you learn the ahamiyya to dalil wa adillah. حفظ النصوص قال الله قال الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم قال الصحابة. That's dalil, adillah. And after that you go beyond and say, I need the ta'lilat. How do you get there? From there to there. Because if you talk to people, you don't want them just to take the dalil only. You want to make sure you understood it correctly yourself and then to others. So usul al-fiqh essentially covers that topic. The scholars are defined in many ways. So if you want a simple understanding of it, we said, is the subject matter that studies the evidences. Right? Really, if you want to be honest, it's simple. Right? But when scholars they define it, they usually say it's the subject matter where we're talking about the adillatul ahkam al-shar'iyyah, the evidences of the legislated rulings, al-ijmaliyah, which are comprehensive. So adillatul ahkam al-shar'iyyah al-ijmaliyah. Adillatul ahkam, the evidences of the ahkam al-shar'iyyah, of the legislative rulings, al-ijmaliyah, which are comprehensive. ووجوه دلالتها or دلالتها, and in the ways in which they indicate different meanings. The key word is adilla. You're studying evidences, and you're studying it ijmali, and the ones which are ijmali, not the ones which are like restricted or limited. So adillatul ahkam al-shar'iyyah ijmaliyah. So in other words, the comprehensive legislative evidences, that's what you're studying, and the different ways in which they indicate things, and their indications or significations. That's what we're studying. So ijmaliyah versus tafsiliyah. Right? As you can go into fiqh. Fiqh is tafsili. This is ijmali. It's wider. So to give you a simple example to remember, when you're studying the Quran, whether the Quran is a proof or not, or which parts of the Quran, which qira'ah is a proof or not, this is called usul fiqh. If you're studying if wudu is a condition or a pillar of salah, this is called fiqh. Okay, because now you're going into the issues at hand. Usul of fiqh, you're dealing with the evidences at hand. What is and what is not evidence, and what does the evidence indicate? So, for example, if I have a command indicates obligation. That's usul of fiqh. But if someone asks you, what's the proof that salah is wajib? Aqimu salah. Establish the prayer. That's fiqh. Because now you took a specific evidence and you got the ruling. Salah is wajib. قال الله تعالى أقيموا الصلاة. Establish the prayer. طيب, how do you know it's wajib? Al-amr yufid al-wujub. Commandments give us obligations. That's called usul fiqh. Because you went from ayah from dalil to ta'leel. Evidence to meaning and rationale. Without just evidence to ruling, but when you tell me how you got the ruling, now you're in the usul fiqh realm. That's the knowledge that we need, brothers and sisters. And it's not just fiqh. Aqeedah. You find today even Aqeedah, unfortunately, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, I'm talking about the Western world, the people who are ascribing to Manhaj Salafi, they need to strengthen their approach to Aqeedah and the foundation which they establish, and we're going to get to it in a second. So when we talk about usul fiqh, then the topics are limited because you're really dealing with evidences and indications. So usul fiqh is not this everlasting or vast topic. Most of those are unacceptable to be part of usul fiqh. So we're going to see some ulama and some writers and thinkers have put into usul fiqh what is not part of it. So for example, you open a traditional usul fiqh book, you have in the beginning the subject of mantiq, logic, and they have discussions about, things like what's the origin of Arabic language? Is it revelation or is it human effort? And you think, where are we going with this, right? And then you have discussions about, and we're going to give some examples. It has nothing to do with fiqh. No hukum can be applied from that, but this is what it's full of. So by the time you finish figuring out what is going on, your head is hurting, and you have no hukum. Brothers and sisters, majority of the biggest of usul fiqh scholars, they did this, and they have no output in fiqh, or very limited output. And to show us this point is that some of the ulama, like Hafid ibn Hajar, he writes, rahimahullah, in Talkhis al-Habir, volume 1, page 621, about Abu Mu'ali al-Ma'ali al-Juwayni, Abu Mu'ali al-Juwayni, the famous Shafi'i scholar and usul fiqh expert. Ibn Hajar says about him, rahimahullah, that he would very limited or very seldom go back to the books of hadith which were well known, فضلا عن غيرها. كان قليل المراجعة. He had very little review of the لكتب الحديث مشهورة, of the well-known hadith books. فضلا عن غيرها, let alone any other books. And the reason why I'm telling you, because if you read the traditional usul fiqh books, not to say anything about Juwayni and his knowledge, but this is the problem. It's not usul fiqh ala manhaj salaf. So when you open it, it's conversations or all aqliyat that don't belong even in aqeedah, they belong in ilm al-kalam. And then they got put into usul fiqh. So now we're going to see very quickly who polluted usul fiqh. The Mu'tazila. They polluted it brothers and sisters. Even a book like Waraqat al-Jawaini has in it ilm al-kalam, and you don't know. You see, even though the ulama say it's a good book to begin, but you have to مع ملاحظات, يعني with the notes. And the reason why I'm saying that is we can't just say I'm going to study usul al-fiqh. Where our objective usul al-fiqh على منهج سلف الصالح, that's what we want. And number two, usul al-fiqh, which is tatbiqi, it's applicable, not theoretical only. And that's the purpose of these lessons. We're going to go from principle to application. We're going to go right into it. And who's amongst the many scholars who prefer this method? All the ulama al-hadith. But most notably, who started this, or maybe popularized it most, and you can see it's probably the most foremost in this, is Ibn Rushd al-Maliki, rahimahullah, in Bidayat al-Mujtahid. And we're going to see later on, what did he do for usul al-fiqh? And it's very important, brothers and sisters, to understand this. Usul al-fiqh is supposed to be from principle to application, right? In fiqh. I'm not talking about something that maybe it's very interesting, but its applications are not there. Another thing to also be mindful of is that if usul al-fiqh then is not that vast, and there's been things added to it, therefore we can summarize or restrict usul al-fiqh back to its principles. And some of the ulama say it's only 3 chapters. Total, it's 4 chapters. In total, it's 4 chapters. Usul al-fiqh, just 4 chapters. But many of those chapters, right, are also not necessarily needed in order for to understand usul al-fiqh the best way. So some of the ulama, when they talk about Imam al-Ghazali in the beginning of al-Mustasfa, in this book, he talks about what usul al-fiqh covers. He talks about the 4 elements. But some of the ulama say if you just want to summarize usul al-fiqh, it's really to do with 3 major topics amongst many. And the first one is kind of like a muqaddimah, then 3 others. The first muqaddimah then is to do with ahkam. What does it mean, ahkam and rulings? That's the first chapter, ahkam. What does it mean, hukum and ahkam? What does the rulings mean? That's the first one. The second topic in usul al-fiqh is adillah, evidences. What are they? Which ones are evidences, which ones are not? So obviously the Quran, Sunnah, Ijma' like this, and others which there's difference of opinion on. So we're going to see then, the ulama usually when they say adillah, 4 of them they agree upon, and then the others they differ. Quran, Sunnah, Ijma' and Qiyas. So that topic is called adillah, evidences. Which ones are and which ones are not. That's chapter number 2 in Usul al-Fiqh. Chapter number 3, ad-dalala. Ad-dalalat, which means indications. What do the evidences indicate? Okay, what do they indicate? So for example, the statement of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what do they tell us? His actions, what do they tell us? Which words indicate commands? Which words indicate prohibitions? Which ones are abrogations, like this? And that is one of this, if not the most important one. Because for the vast majority of ulama, they agree upon the adillah. The dalalat, that's the part where you spend a lot of time on. What does each evidence indicate or its categorizations? And the last one is to do with at-ta'arud wa tarjih. Supposed contradictions and how to make tarjih, how to make preponderance, make one ruling over another. So for example, we have 2 hadith, they don't seem to go together. We don't know what to do. What's the steps? It's called ilm al-ta'arud tarjih. Ta'arud means contradiction, seeming contradiction, because there's no contradiction in the Quran and Sunnah. And what do you do about them? So really it's 4 topics. Some will say, brother, what about the topic about like other things? Like the ulama, for example, Usul al-Fiqh, they talk about hadith, ahad, wal mutawatir. So some of the ulama said, yes, those topics are important, but they're not for ulama Usul al-Fiqh. Hadith studies for the ulama hadith. So what the usuliyun say about hadith is not considered hujjah inda ahlul hadith. And the reason I'm saying that usuliyun have different understanding of hadith in the muhaddithun. So some of the ulama say leave the hadith in muhaddithun. How about tafsir? In the ilm usul al-fiqh, there is a discussion about tafsir or about ulum al-Quran. Ulama say leave that to ahlul Quran, ahlul tafsir. So take that out too. Then you have ilm al-kalam, ilm mantiq. That's for nobody's business, right? Take that all out. That's ilm al-haram, right? So we don't need that one. Take that out. And so what do? You come back to the principles like this. Now someone will say about why when we study them. No one is not studying them. But we're talking about usul al-fiqh, brothers and sisters. We're talking about usul al-fiqh. We're not talking about subjects outside its subject matter. It's like when you go to ulum al-hadith, look at the index. Look at the ulum al-fiqh index. Arabic is index. Everyone has their subject matter. Usul al-fiqh became, unfortunately, more than what's in this topic. So ulama noticed that. It needs to be cut down. And this is not my speech. This is a conclusion of who? Imam al-Shatibi in Al-Muwafaqat. Volume 1, page 26, he mentions that there's been entrance into it, and he entered into the issues of the Masail al-Usul, are topics which are not from Usul. So whomsoever enters into it and mixes it up, then this is considered, right, or mixes it up, some of these chapters with others is considered incorrect. So he mentions in there in Muwafaqat that what is Usul al-Fiqh is that which has jurisprudential benefit. Actually act upon it for fiqh purposes. Hence, if it's not to do with fiqh and how to get to fiqh and what is to do, it's not Usul al-Fiqh. Even though it's in the books of Usul al-Fiqh. And the reason why I'm saying that most of what you might have studied before, I kind of give you a little bit difficult time understanding it, wasn't even Usul al-Fiqh. And how do we know? Go to the beginning of Bidayat al-Mujtahid of Imam Ibn Rushd or Ibn Rushd al-Maliki. Before he wrote this book is in 2 volumes, and many of our ulama consider the best book to study fiqh, comparative fiqh. Fiqh al-Muqaran, comparative fiqh, that's the best book to study. It's not an easy book because it brings all 4 madhabs and others, and he brings their proofs and their reasoning for their proofs, and he explains, the first one ever to explain why there's difference of opinion. It's the first to actually explain it properly. He's not even, right? He's a Maliki scholar. That's what shocked the ulama first. And he's also a specialist in ilm al-kalam, right? Because he had issues in aqeedah and some things. But when it comes to fiqh, the ulama were amazed by this book. Because the first one to discuss in detail, sabab al-khilaf. Why the ulama differed. No one else really discusses that detail. So what he would do is he'd bring you the issue, madhab 1, 2, 3, and the reason why it differed is because of this issue, and here's what they said, and here's what they said, and here's what they said. And the book is designed in 2 volumes to make someone mujtahid. He says this book, if you study it properly with his manhaj, you become mujtahid. 2 volumes, brothers. Then you wonder why Shaykh Al-Albani said this is the best book to study, and why in Medina University they used to teach it, and they're bringing it back again. These are the books that someone want to study with his muqaddimah, with his understanding of it. Someone could become mujtahid. Wallahu bihi alim. It's possible. But that was the design of the book. And what he does is very interesting but also amazing. Because his muqaddimah for Usul al-Fiqh is 3 pages. That's it, just 3 pages. That's all the Usul al-Fiqh you need for the rest of the book. 3 pages. And he does his own style. Nobody else did something like him. I want to ask the question, brothers and sisters, 3 pages. Someone will say, that's enough. Read the rest of the book, see for yourself. Because the other books which are in volumes, they can't do what he does in that book. Hence, there's a methodological issue there. And this is why our ulama in today's time are talking a lot about this. They're going back to the authentic usul al-fiqh, but also the practical one. The one that me and you want to, when you go to fiqh class, like I'm following the conversation. I'm not sitting there and the sheikh said this and he went there and we're lost. What was he doing? What was these principles and these things? It's not, as some ulama said, it's very easy if you understand it the right way. But can be made very hard. It's been made hard. And one of the reasons we say is because the Mu'tazila fled to ilm usul al-fiqh in order to defend their aqeedah al-batila. They're in false aqeedah. Because what did they have, brothers? Mu'tazila has a dalil. He's going to bring you dalil, but he's all going to bring you aql too. He's going to bring you qa'idah, he misconstrued, or he developed, and he's going to throw it under you, and you're going to look at him like, what can I say to him? Example, just to give you an example. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Allah says, we didn't create the jinn or the ins except to worship me. What's this lam? إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Lam, which lam is this? So we say Allah created us for His worship. The Mu'tazila say, no. Allah doesn't create for hikmah. Astaghfirullah. You believe Allah has wisdom and end goals? That's not lam or illah. And you look at him, what lam is it then? He's going to say it's lam al-aqibah. You look and say, what is that? What is going on here? He's going to take an ayah you read and say, what kind of fahm do you have? Ayah is wrong, your understanding. Which lam is that? That's how we're going, brothers. We're going there. And you have to catch him and say, what are you saying? Lam aqiba. And you bring him from the Arabic and you bring it from the Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah. When you read his jawab, he gets it right from the bottom. So where are you going with this? This is what they do, brothers. Me and you, we know the ayah, but do you notice that? You can't just bring someone ayah. He's going to bring you a wrong fahm. A correct opinion to lam illah. Because Ahl-Sunnah Jama'ah believe Allah is wise and He creates wise purposes. That's our aqeedah. But you see what they're going to do to you. He's not going to tell you ayah is not in the Quran. He's not that dumb, right? He's not going to say, this is not an ayah. I never heard before. He's going to tell you, brother, you know that lamb. And you're going to say, well, what's going on? How many lambs are there? And this is the thing, brothers and sisters, you're noticing. Not for everybody, but the people of al-ilm, tulab al-ilm, those who study deen. Ahl-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah. There is no second way around it. Haqq is haqq. We know the answers to these questions. We should know. But we also need to be aspiring to understand it that way. I'll give you one more example. When you study Kitab al-Tawheed, we studied it. Didn't we come across the issue where we said that cauterization, the practice to cauterize, is considered makruh? Some of us remember this issue of cauterization when you brand someone on fire. Right? So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we talked about the people who are going to Jannah directly, بدون حساب, الذين لا يكتمون. لا يكتمون means they don't cauterize. Right? So that's the condition. So the question is, cauterization haram or not? I think most of us would agree that it's not haram, it's makruh. And some will say, but Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, وَمَا أُحِبُّ أَنْ أَكْتَوِي. I don't like to cauterize myself. So there's another hadith that says Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam cauterized a sahabi, Ubay ibn Ka'ab, on the Ahzab. So Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam cauterized Ubay. Then the Prophet said, I don't like to cauterize. Then he said, whoever cauterizes won't be from 70,000. What's the ruling on cauterization? So some of us, when we do Kitab al-Tawheed, we think it's haram. No, we're going to say, if you want to go to the 70,000, you shouldn't do it. If you have a sickness, it's makruh, but permissible to do it. And that's the conclusion. Jama' adillah, get all the evidences and understand it. But what do we use? What's principle using here? And you see, brothers, this is different between somebody who's studying the deen and somebody who's a layperson who may ask you, brother, what's the ruling? You're going to say makruh. You'll say, Jazakallah khair, he'll walk. And then you will come and say, what's the ruling? Makruh. How do you get it? That's the question someone's going to ask you. So you can't be like, well, Nabi Sallallahu did it. That doesn't say, but he said, I don't like to do it. So what are we going to do? Usul al-Fiqh says, when you have two evidences like these, you have to bring them together, Jama' adillah, and we have a principle. Let's just learn this one for today. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, whenever he tells us a prohibition, the prohibition is carried to mean absolutely prohibition, unless there's another evidence. النهي يصرف إلى الكراهة لدليل يقتضي ذلك. النهي, prohibitions, يصرف إلى الكراهة, would be turned towards disliked. So a prohibition usually means prohibition, right? نهى رسول صلى الله عليه وسلم means prohibited, tahrim. But it goes from haram to makruh, لدليل, due to an evidence, يقتضي ذلك, that can carry it to that secondary meaning. And what's our proof here? Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم just said, I don't like to cauterize. Then he cauterized. So therefore, the cauterization can't be haram because Nabi Sallallahu doesn't do haram things. Hence, it's makruh. Khalas. Simple. That will also help us to know if somewhere back home people are doing this, what's the best we can say? It's makruh. But someone will say, but how about the 70,000? 70,000 is fadl, ya Shaykh. We're not talking about fadail. We're talking about ahkam. You see, the two. If you're talking about you want to get in that category, that's fadl. You're talking about people who are sick and need it. And then we go beyond that. What if somebody like you and I are sick and you go to the hospital and you have an open wound and the doctor will give you like electric cauterization now, right? He puts the electricity, no fire, and he closes your wound. And you're going to be like, astaghfirullah, I lost the 70,000 now, Shaykh. Right? So you see some people, no, I can't do it. And you're going to die on the table, what are you going to do? There's no karaha ma'al haja. Shaykh, come on, you're in a bad state. He's doing it, you didn't tell him to, you're unconscious, inshallah. You didn't say nothing, he just did it. But you see, some people might be there like, oh, I heard it's haram. It's like, Shaykh, where are you going with this? What are we doing here? And this is scary because it's not the awam who are doing this. People who are studying deen. People who study deen have to do better. Because you're studying ilm, you're talib ilm, you have to know things better. But the layperson, I could understand the layperson would end up there. But you see the point, brothers, this is powerful. Why? Because now you say, okay, now I understand the issue. I have a principle to walk with. I have both evidences. I have ilm al-basira. Now I can do da'wah. And I can tell people a better answer. That's just one principle. So the benefit we take from this is that if you learn more about Usul Fiqh, not only is your knowledge strengthened, you'll be able to better defend the truth, and you'll go from a lay perspective to more of a student of knowledge perspective or a scholarly level. And I'm going to talk about towards the end here how we can go about doing that. Let's give one more example, the difference between a lay person and a talib ilm, and that has to do with Usul Fiqh. Sheikh Hassan Bukhari, one of the shuyukh in Mecca, who teaches Usul Fiqh and is an expert in it, he has a kitab, Madkhal Lidarasa Usul Fiqh, just introduction to study Usul Fiqh. And he talks about this example to show you the difference between Usul Fiqh, the one who has and the one who doesn't. And he says, for example, let's talk about the issue of eating camel's meat if it breaks the wudu or not. So we know there's a hadith about this, right? And before we get there, the ruling on camel's meat breaking the wudu, it's the opinion of the Hanabila. So 3 out of 4 madhabs say it doesn't break the wudu. Remember correctly, 3 out of 4. Right? So almost all the madhabs, illa Hanabila, except for the Hanabila. So this is from the fara'id or the tafarrud, the singular issues of the Hanabila. So they say that a camel meat breaks the wudu. Hence, when you study a Hanbali fiqh manual, it's there. A Shafi'i or Hanafi Malik, it's not there. Right? So you probably noticed that. Most people, if you tell them camel meat breaks the wudu, they're like, no. And I think they're like, well, you're not Hanbali, right? That's the first sign. Right? But why did an Hanbali say this? Well, we're going to say there's a hadith. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was asked, Hadith Bara ibn Azib and also Hadith Jabir, about eating camel's meat, whether or not it breaks the wudu. So the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was asked about this topic, about luhum al-ibn, and he said, tawadda'u minha, make wudu as a cause of it. Another hadith, he said, should we make wudu? He said, na'am, yes. And then they asked about sheep's meat, and he said, if you want, and it means you don't have to. So here is clear evidence, and this hadith in Muslim and others, authentic hadith, that camel's meat breaks the wudu. Why did the majority not take that view? So the majority of scholars, they have a proof that they believe it abrogates this. But before going there, what would a layperson know? A layperson's conclusion would be camel's meat breaks the wudu or doesn't break the wudu. That's all he knows. So if you ask him, he'll say it doesn't break the wudu. Or if he studies another madhab, Hanbali madhab, breaks the wudu, and he walks. طيب, he might even have a hadith. Talib ilm, he's going to say it breaks the wudu or doesn't, and here's why. On qawl sahih, we say it breaks the wudu. How do we know that? Well, we're going to see Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's hadith. But how do come there's a difference of opinion, there's a clear-cut hadith? So we're going to say the other group, they say, the majority of the scholars, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Hadith Bukhari Muslim, he mentions in there that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he used to initially command us to make wudu from anything that touches fire. You probably heard this hadith, everything that touches fire. Mimma massad nar, anything that touches fire, you should make wudu. But later in his life, turik al-wudu, he left it off. So the scholars, they say then, when you eat camel's meat, you cook it, right? Touch the fire. Oh, it's abrogated. You get it? Because you don't make wudu from burgers, right? So that's abrogated. Camel meat, not abrogated. So you're taking that opinion. They're saying that all abrogations made for meats. طيب. Talib ilm or someone who's usul al-fiqh, how would he respond to that? He will say, well, we have now one hadith is general, hadith that says wudu should be left off due to things that touch fire, and we have hadith khas, a specific hadith that says for camel's meat, wal khas yuqaddim al-'am. Restricted evidences come before generalities, done deal. That is knowledge, evidence, reasoning, and conclusion. That's a talib ilm. That, he says, a talib ilm or someone who studied the deen, because he went from ruling, wudu camel meat breaks the wudu, proof, hadith Jabir and Bara ibn Azib. Evidence is specific. Other hadith is general. Specific goes over general, ruling is breaks the wudu. Done. See, now he's going to go with qawl sahih and he has the reasoning. Ami all knows, no wudu, no wudu. You see, brothers and sisters, the problem we're saying is that it's not necessary to know every issue like that. But imagine you know no issues like this. Fin aqidah, wal fiqh, then tomorrow it's only a matter of time you're going to fall off the knowledge. Or somebody's going to come and get you away from the haqq. Brothers and sisters, where it gets more interesting is when usul fiqh connects with aqidah. And maybe next week I will show some examples of those. Usul fiqh, Arabic, and aqidah, they're all intertwined. Hence, our aqidah is also needs to be defended this way. But today we're just talking about usul fiqh. How do we go about authentically understanding usul fiqh? That would require us to go back to its foundations and remove anything that's not from it. I'll just summarize today, just very quickly, at the end of this, how or things that we should be mindful of that are not part of usul fiqh, that should be avoided, or that are to be watchful of. Because we said usul fiqh is 3 or 4 chapters really, right? Everything else really is not part of it. And therefore, the ulama say that if somebody studies usul fiqh the way the Sahaba and Salaf understood it, and also focused on practical applications, not only will they have good usul fiqh, because they take it from the Quran and Sunnah of Salaf, they will also have proper fiqh. Because again, the founder of this, or the authorship, Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, he's Aqidah has Sunnah Jama'ah, he's not Mu'tazila, and no one has anything on Shafi'i when it comes to this. So we're going to say, how does Shafi'i study usul fiqh? What's in the Kitab al-Risala? What's in the books like that? That's how the scholars, they looked at it. So they said there are things we have to remove and things that we have to include. Things that we remove, let's give some examples. Number one, we should remove all knowledges that are not the Quran and the Sunnah and the Fahm of the Salaf. Yani any source, masdar, which is not from the authentic masadir, which means we rely only on wahi, Quran and Sunnah. Again, the fahm sahaba and salaf. So the urf, shara', the understanding and the cultural and customs of the sahaba, and Arabic language. So those are what usul al-fiqh should be relying upon, Quran and Sunnah. And from Quran and Sunnah come qiyas wal ijma'. One knows that Quran and Sunnah, the origin, and ijma' qiyas come from there. And then we also rely upon the fahm and the urf of the sharia. What was the Sahaba's understanding of that time and their culture at that time, because of the implications, as well as their own statements and practices. And lastly, Arabic language, pure Arabic language. So therefore, that's what we should rely upon. And that then would require us to purge or get rid of the use of ilm al-kalam wal-mantiq in usul al-fiqh. So if we're going to rely upon Quran, Sunnah, understanding of the Sahaba, their customs, and Arabic, get rid of the things that oppose that. What the Sahaba didn't have of knowledge. Ilm al-kalam? No. Mantiq? No. And again, we're not talking about people studying this outside of this to learn how to respond to them. And we're talking about usul al-fiqh. Right? So we're going to see some examples. There's no connection between the two topics. So we have to get rid of that and replace it with this. What are some of those examples of things you have to get rid of? So there are many, right? But for example, I gave one. Right? Some of the scholar books of Usul al-Fiqh deal with the Mabda al-Lughat. Right? What's the origin of languages? That's a very fascinating topic, but it has nothing to do with Usul al-Fiqh. Right? It's interesting, guys, because we're going to argue that languages are both come from Allah. Allah reveals to us, but also human beings, they can add afterwards some things. But the idea is that it's a super interesting topic about the proof of Allah's existence, because the argument of languages is a proof for Allah exists. Right? So that's an interesting topic, but not usul fiqh, right? Because it has nothing to do with fiqh. Another topic that the ulama put in there, hulul hawadith. Right? That's nothing. This is nothing to do with aqidah. Fiqh. This is Ash'ari talk. Right? For example, at-ta'thir, the impacts of causality and effects. Cause and effect has nothing to do with usul fiqh. Right? Cause and effect. Right? What does this have to do with it? And again, these are all the big books of usul fiqh, guys. The whole list of these. Other issues, tajseem, like bodily forms. Again, what does that have to do with? Okay, a very famous one. Hal ma'dumu shay? Is nothing considered something? What does that have to do with usul fiqh? That's a conversation in the books. Hal ma'dumu shay? Is nothing something? I guess in the Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah, I'll deal with it. But when usul fiqh, I'm trying to learn fiqh. What does that have to do with fiqh? You see, brothers, it's very important. There's a long list. Maybe some of them list, some of the people knowledge mentioned maybe 64 different issues are not supposed to be there. 64. So the reason I'm telling you that, it's like you just imagine you took all that out. Now you're like, mashallah, this is good. All right. Next, what do we have to focus on? In order for usul fiqh to be done properly, we need to define terminologies in the right way. So terminologies can be defined in the right way and the wrong way. So terminologies or definitions should be given based on the way that the Sahaba, Rasul used to give definitions. I'll just say it that way. We don't give definitions the way that the ilm al-mantiq or logic teaches us. Because those definitions are overcomplicated, not beneficial, and they're not jami' mani anyways, right? So it's not beneficial. So definitions should be given the way Rasul gave them. Another example. Usul al-fiqh should be restricted to the practices of the Sahaba and Tabi'un. So after that, there's difference of opinion. But the Sahaba, madhab al-Sahabi, wa ra'yu Sahabi is considered hujjah ala sah al-aqwal, the most correct opinion. And the Tabi'un, their fahm can also be taken, if need be, to make proof when you need it. So we bring that in. We should also not rely upon pure intellect. Reliance on pure intellect should be removed from usul al-fiqh. عدم الاعتماد على أدلة عقلية محضة. Pure intellectual argumentation and forms should be removed. Also, we remove ahadith ضعيفة والتي لا أصل لها. We don't rely upon ahadith ضعيفة and have no origin. Because we know Quran and Sunnah is we need ahadith صحيحة. That means صحيح لذاتي, صحيح لغيري, حسن لذاتي, حسن لغيري. Those four categories. As for hadith ضعيف, they do have room in fiqh if their meaning is correct and other evidences, but generally we try to remove them. Because that is what's in the evidence to authentic is sufficient. Another thing that we try to avoid is including any topic which has its own independent disciplinary. Nahu wal mustalah al hadith wal tafsir, etc. should be left to those subjects. Hence, Usul al-Fiqh, even though it overlaps, you should focus more on the matters to do with fiqh. Another thing that we should be including is plentiful examples from the Quran and Sunnah. Plentiful of examples or plenty examples from the Quran and Sunnah. Because many of the Usul al-Fiqh books have no examples. For example, some of the examples have to do with other religions and different topics, which are interesting, but it's just like, no, what about fiqh? So for example, I'm going to teach you about obligations and things like this. I should bring you a fiqh issue. But I say, you learn fiqh, you learn from the usul fiqh, from fiqh. That's why we should need more of them, not less of them. We also can see then we should avoid all deviant thinkers or scholars who have influenced usul fiqh, whether it be the Rafida, the Shia, or the Mu'tazila, like Nizam, and others like these. So Mu'tazila and those people will avoid them. We need to stick to the ulama who have correct aqeedah and correct understanding. And if someone does this then inshallah ta'ala, with this, and of course adding two more things, he'll be able to achieve the correct approach to usul al-fiqh before getting in. And the last two is to also rely upon, like we said, fahm al-salaf, and we're going to explain how to do that. And also you have to ensure that when we're doing usul al-fiqh itself as a tool, as a principle, it's a mechanism, it's a tool, it's a methodology. But again, it relies upon the same things for Quran and Sunnah. So usul al-fiqh is not an independent evidence. It's not something you use against the Quran and Sunnah. It's something you use to help understand the Quran and Sunnah. Fahm al-Sahaba and Salaf. How do you know you have Fahm al-Sahaba and Salaf? So scholars say if in order to restrict the Quran and Sunnah to Fahm al-Salaf, we need two things. Number one, Ijma' al-Sahaba al-Salaf. And number two, Madhab wa Ara al-Sahaba al-Salaf. You need their ijma' and their thoughts and their practices. So the actions of the Sahaba, their opinions, that's one way. That's fahm. That's what they said, that's what they did. You use that to restrict the Quran and Sunnah. And number two, what they made ijma' about. So when we have ijma' of Sahaba and Salaf, it's hujjah. Right? It's very important because some books, they don't entertain the opinions of the Sahaba as strongly as they're supposed to. Inshallah, with this much, we can see then usul al-fiqh is not as difficult as some people might imagine. And if someone studies it, inshallah ta'ala, with the correct methodology, it's enjoyable. It also has big fruits, right, in terms of what it brings. We will see, inshallah, as we go along, looking at issues. So what we're going to do, instead of just using one book, we'll go over different topics. So, for example, we'll talk about the beginning rules, which we started with. We said ahkam. So ahkam, the different types, principles underneath it, and application. And then we'll look at some of the books where they use it so you can see how it's applied. And then you will train yourself to start thinking this way then. When you see something, okay, this is this, that. And then you can do what the usuliyun do. Some of the ulama, brothers and sisters, they mentioned, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, of our time, is an imam. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, many of us, we have to know, he's an imam in fiqh or usul al-fiqh. And his books are enough for someone to understand the topic to the point that they'll be able to understand both the usul and furu'. So a book, for example, that many of us know, Sharh al-Mumti'. This book is his explanation of Zal al-Mustaqni'. This book is not a regular book. It's a very, very important book. It's the fiqh book of the era, of the time. In there, he brings you fiqh, wa usul al-fiqh, wa qawa'id, wa dawabit, wa tarjihat. It's a genius. It's absolute genius. But when you read it, some of the ulama say if someone were to read this, and I'm going to bring you next week Shaykh Sulaymaan Ruhayli's kalam, because someone might say, how do you go usul al-fiqh, 3 books, or fiqh, 3 books? I'm going to show you that Shaykh Sulaymaan Ruhayli has his teachers, 3 books on usul al-fiqh, 3 books on fiqh. Someone become faqih, he says, usuli faqih. 3 and 3, someone does it, right? Not you have to understand them, he's saying, not just read them and say, oh, faqih. You have to understand it. But imagine, why I'm saying this, because in some people's mind, it's a long list of going, where are we going with it? And this is a question people ask, where are we going with this? We keep studying this stuff again and again, and we're not going nowhere. Because it's a methodology is going to confuse us. So why is it important? One of the books is Sharh al-Mumti'. And in there, some of the ulama have said, especially students Shaykh Uthaymeen, that book brings us usul al-fiqh, qawa'id al-fiqhiyya, dawabit al-fiqhiyya, fiqh al-nawazil, and shows you how to do tarjih, how to get the correct opinion, and the masail, all in one book. And there are books called Usul al-Fiqh wa Dawabit fi Sharh al-Mumti'. There's another book called Usul al-Fiqh wa Dawabit wa Qawa'id in the Kutub Uthaymeen. All his books, they bring all the Qawa'id he has. Brothers, what I'm trying to explain here is that there is a lot of helping hands out there for us to understand topics, to allow us not to maybe obviously become like Shaykh Uthaymeen, but to start thinking the way the fuqaha are thinking. To appreciate what they're doing, and later on, inshallah, through practice, to become, inshallah, along those lines. Just like we talked about hadith, it's the same approach. And the reason I'm presenting this is that we need that for the brothers who are sitting, who are studying with us, who are coming to the classes regularly. This is where we need to be going in order to da'wah to the people, to defend the truth, to silence the mistakes, to guide people who might be confused. It requires these principles. Hence, when your usul is strong in any subject, you can do a lot of effort to guide the people. Inshallah ta'ala, a little bit goes far. And inshallah, next week we'll just talk about each part one by one, a simple way, examples, and then to understand. And we'll cover things from like fiqh and even sometimes aqidah. So we can look at both sides, inshallah ta'ala. And who has any quick questions, inshallah, we'll take. Anybody? Let's see online here. Yes, brother. So it's a good point. What's the ijma' of Sahaba? If someone disagrees. So generally ijma' is the consensus of all the reputable scholars, the Sahaba for example, all of them. And we'll see later the types of ijma'. So there's categories and conditions. So that's what come later. But like when it comes to ijma', when we hear it, it means the people of knowledge of a particular era, the Sahaba or otherwise, all the reputable scholars agreed. Now does that mean then that somebody who agreed, we have to have exact words? So there's two types of ijma'. Ijma' sukuti and ijma' which is like sarih, yani clear cut. Most ijma' is on the first one, the sukuti. It means if a scholar heard another scholar's view and he didn't disagree with them, hence this is silent approval because it's not allowed for the ulama to keep quiet. So we'll see when the Sahaba make ijma' on something, and how many ijma'at are there, right? That's a good question too. And we see the list, it's very feasible to prove that, yes, that all of them agree to that. But the question we're also going to see that when it comes to ijma' and its weight, with the conditions of ijma', when you meet them and you see them, then you can start seeing how to apply it and when cannot be applied. For example, when is there really ijma' and when there isn't, and the conversation of when there was an ijma' but it was not known, and later on there came a khilaf, or ijma' was established and someone did a khilaf after. How do you deal with that? So we're going to go, when we get to adillah, into those details and get those principles, because you need them. Otherwise, like I said, someone might say ijma' and say, no, it's no ijma', and we're fighting over that. Yes? So we're going to see the Quran and Sunnah. The brother is saying, is the Quran higher than the evidence in Sunnah? Both are wahi min Allah. أَلَا إِنِّي أُوتِيتُ الْقُرْآنَ مِثْلَهُ مَعًا. So they're both from the same source. So this approach is more correct. Hence, the Quran is not contradicting the Sunnah. Rather, the Quran is there for the general, and the specifications usually in the Hadith. So when we see that when it comes to the understanding, they go hand in hand, right? But we'll see later when it comes to the issues of like restriction and restricting evidences. Can the Sunnah restrict the Quran? That's the question that we'll ask. So we'll see later. The correct way that both of them are considered epistemically the same way. Both wahi min Allah. But as we'll see later, like the brother asked, those questions will come, inshallah. Yes? So this is more to do with tafsir. Brothers asking about ayat and asbab al-nuzul having more than one. This is usually many ayat have more than one. And they're not counted because usul al-tafsir is different than usul al-fiqh. In usul al-tafsir we understand, even in general, studies, there's a whole qawa'id al-usul. And that's one of them, the qawa'id to do with asbab al-nuzul. And the benefit we take from that is it's not contradictory, as some people assume. Contradiction is a very heavy word. It has a condition. For a contradiction to be contradictory, as we said before, it has 8 conditions you have to fulfill, or 6 you get. Some of them you fulfill, some you have to negate. It's not easy to call contradiction. But what people have to understand is like ayat and revelation, meanings and instances, are like, for example, ayat hijab has 3 instances of revelation. all complementary, right? And so also that's the thing. So that's the benefit we're going to see. But there's more to do with tafsir. Even though Usul Fiqh, they do have it. But like we said, when we talk about Usul Fiqh, we're restricting the conversation to that which is applicable to direct fiqh, as we'll see later. And that's what we need. But this one, you could approach it more on that. So I think on Fajr, maybe we did those classes talking about those issues of Asbab and Nuzul in more detail. Yes. I'll mention next week because I have the kitab. I don't want to misquote it. So I'll bring next week these statements to show you a methodology some of the scholars propose. Many scholars have these methodologies. But the only reason I'm mentioning is to show us that the concept of Usul Fiqh is so impenetrable. It's impossible. No one's going to get it. This is because of this problem. We're reading maybe the books we have complicated, full of kalam, and as some of the ulama have written, we have shown that it is easy if someone did study properly. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll show that. Next week I'll read from that statement. Yes. So we're going to get to that statement. Ahmed, whoever claimed ijma' is a liar, and this is not a misunderstanding of what he meant, right? Because he didn't deny ijma' from the Usul, al-Hanabil is ijma', right? So the people, what they did is they mixed what ijma' was he talking about, right? So that's the thing. So is it the one where it's everyone saying it verbally, or is he talking about one where it's just silent? So the problem with this is that some people have taken this and said, yep, there's no such thing as ijma'. Astaghfirullah, right? So you have to be careful. They forgot. Yeah, Ahmed, does he believe in ijma'? Doesn't he use it against others? And then no, he said there's no such thing. And then in his method, it's there. So we're going to talk about this misunderstanding. Yes. So the thing is, like Sheikh Salah Sheikh, he said that to compare the fiqhs from the West academia. The idea is like the ulama different, right? Some of them, they view comparative fiqh means you study all fiqh madhabs together with evidence. It means you don't study one madhab, you study the masail as they are. So most of our mawsu'at are like that. But like I said, Ibn Rushd, when he first wrote it, what he did is he brings you all of that. So that's the thing. But at the end, like the idea of the traditional study, many ulama will do one madhab, then they'll progress to another one, and to another one like this. So some will do one madhab, then another madhab, then madhab, all four, then they would go from there. But maybe we could look into that statement of the Shaykh. I don't know it personally. Barakallahu feekum. Subhanak bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.